For 22 years, Terry Keeley was one of the top bankers to central banks and sovereign clients, generating some $600 million a year in annual revenue for UBS. He knows a thing or two about currency intervention. There's a right way to do it, and there's a wrong way. Terry, who just opened his own sovereign advisory firm, Sovereign Trends, says the Bank of Japan is getting it mostly right, and he is here to tell us why. So tell us, Terry. A lot of people have some criticism for the Bank of Japan, including Jean-Claude Juncker, this morning saying, hey, if you're not doing it in a coordinated fashion, that's not really the right way to go about fixing imbalances. But you think they're actually getting it right for the most part?
Well, a lot of analysts over the last 24, 36 hours, Eric, have criticized the Bank of Japan for going it alone. No question, if you can do it in a coordinated fashion, it tends to be more powerful and more efficient. But we have a number of examples of unsuccessful coordinated intervention and a number of examples of successful uncoordinated intervention. And I think in this case, the Bank of Japan got the latter.
Okay, so explain to us how you go about doing it right, so to speak. And maybe we'll use Japan as an example for the right. And you can highlight some examples of maybe getting it wrong.
So the sine qua non, right, for successful currency intervention is that you intervene in the direction of the intermediate term equilibrium rate. Lots of big words, but the bottom line is, as you say, get the price right. If you're buying low and selling high, that's a good trade, and broadly speaking, that's what the central banks are trying to do. In the case of Japan, they've intervened at a level around 82, 83, 25% higher than the equilibrium rate over the last 10 years. That's a pretty good entry point. And most importantly, what sovereigns need to do is get the direction right on cross interest rates and macroeconomic data. And I do think the Japanese are going to find that cross interest rates and macroeconomic data will favor a weaker yen over time.
Okay, so they didn't have coordination, but they did have the element of surprise going for them as well. Who doesn't get it right?
Well, The truth of the matter is that central banks are growing their foreign exchange reserves in many, many countries. They don't want to call it intervention, but that, in fact, is what it is. We clearly have an example, though, over the last year in the Swiss central bank of very, very active intervention, the first time in 20 years that, quite frankly, is not a terribly Swiss characteristic, but something that perhaps they didn't time as well as they could have.
Okay, let's talk about what happens from now on.
Right.
The Japanese, so far as we know, have only been in on one day. We don't know how many times.
Right.
We don't know how much they spent. We don't know what they bought, whether it's dollars and euros or just one or the other.
Right.
So they're accumulating these foreign reserves on their balance sheet. The Bank of Japan is. What do they need to do right to ensure that this is a successful intervention?
Well, they've got to get the data right. They've got to, unfortunately, know the unknowable. And that is the only, those are the only circumstances in time which will prove them right. The truth of the matter is that the element of surprise is critical because it allows them to get where they want to go with spending the least amount of money. Plaza Accord, the 25-year anniversary is coming up next week, September 22nd. The yen began a 51% move, Eric. Do you have any idea how the 5 coordinated central banks spent to do that? $10 billion. To get a 51% move on $10 billion, that's a successful intervention. You say we don't know how much the Japanese spent, could be between 10 and 30 billion. I suspect it's right in the middle. The 2.5%, 3% move they got, relatively successful. But more importantly, what's going to happen over the next 6 months?